At 6, record numbers of top grades for A-level students after exams are cancelled for a second year in a row because of the pandemic. The number of A's and A stars awarded rises to almost 45% in England, Wales and Northern Ireland after students' grades were determined by teachers, not formal exams.
I think we've experienced things that other years haven't. We've had a lot of uncertainty, and at the end of the day our results came from tests that were done under exam conditions.
In Scotland, a record number have achieved A grades in Highers and Advanced Highers, though the overall pass rate has dropped slightly. More than 200,000 students have also been finding out their BTEC results. We'll have all the details. Also tonight, Prince Andrew declines to comment after an American woman files a civil case in New York claiming he sexually assaulted her when she was 17. How dementia could soon be diagnosed within a day as scientists turn to artificial intelligence. More than 3/4 of adults in the UK are now fully vaccinated. The Prime Minister describes the COVID milestone as a huge national achievement. And what a welcome for Lionel Messi, one of the world's greatest footballers, as he flies into France to agree a deal with Paris Saint-Germain.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, a crunch match for Rangers. The Scottish champions have to beat Malmo to have any chance of going through in their Champions League qualifying leg.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The number of A-level students receiving an A or A star has risen to a record high after exams were cancelled for the second year in a row due to the pandemic. The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has praised students for dealing with unprecedented levels of disruption over the past year. Students were assessed by teachers in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Nearly 45% were awarded top grades compared to 25% in 2019 before the pandemic. The gap between private and state school students achieving top grades has also widened. Our education editor Bronwyn Jeffries reports from the northeast of England, where the number of students achieving top grades has risen, but not as much as everywhere else.
After a tough year for students, the moment of truth. Fewer surprises in this year's envelopes. They know what work and tests teachers have used. Ooh! Fewer tears too, in a bumper year for top grades. And after all, proud of what they've achieved despite the disruption.
Best kind of priority for us is to just keep going and try and get into the uni and try and get to where you want to go, because if you can work through kind of the pandemic and do all your online learning and get your A levels like you wanted, what's stopping you going off to uni and kind of doing what you need to do?
I think the standard has still definitely been there. It's definitely not we've walked in and they've just handed us these grades. We've worked for these grades.
Regardless of what you've got, you should still be incredibly proud of what you've done. I know my family are going to be incredibly proud of what I've done and all the work that I've put in.
Here, A-star grades were slightly down. The principal says they marked students over several months.
They've had to learn from home, and learning from behind a screen is vastly different to being in a college environment. I think the rigour of those grades has been extremely high in terms of the amount of work that the students have had to produce.
Dylan got a distinction merit in his BTEC despite cancer treatment.
Sorry. Yeah, just everything that he's gone through over the last 4 years with his leukemia, he deserves it.
really happy that I'm getting to go to Scarborough because it's the one that I've been focused on getting to.
I got a distinction star,
While top grades in some vocational qualifications are slightly up, the big leap has been in A-levels. What matters to students getting results today is what they do next in life, going into work, an apprenticeship, or getting a place at university. The system this year has been designed to give them grades that will make sure they can go on to those next steps. But the price of that, it seems, is a boom in top grades. A-level grades this year across the UK are based on teacher assessments, from Lurgan in Northern Ireland to Wales, where students got provisional grades in June. But there was no attempt to hold back rising grades with an algorithm.
Newcastle University Clearing, how can I help?
There were some courses in clearing at Newcastle today, but universities are having to choose carefully between top grade students.
A-level grades are not the only thing that determines this. The students' own interests matter a lot, what they say in their personal statement, and in some programmes how they come across at interview and what is our assessment of why they're interested in a programme.
Their place at Newcastle confirmed these friends will be celebrating.
Bramwyn Jeffries with that report. Well, in Scotland, a record number of students have achieved A grades in Highers and Advanced Highers. But overall, the pass rate has dropped slightly since last year, though it's still significantly higher than before the pandemic. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon reports.
At the Pace Youth Theatre Group in Paisley, they're rehearsing a show about heading to university. The pandemic meant no final exams for school students this year.
You're watching
for those
ITV
here,
News
that didn't
in
mean
the Channel
less work.
Islands. James Webster and Emma Baker.
In a
have your
normal year, I maybe would have
headlines.
sat 5 or 6 exams. That year, I sat 19. I really feel like the year has been so incredibly difficult this year and last year, of course, as well. Nothing was a fluke.
Results were based on teacher assessment, a fairer system, say these students, who, like many others across Scotland, have been awarded A's.
Normally all the pressure's just on one day and some people might have an off day. The higher grades is kind of proof that this is a better way for students to get the grades that they deserve.
People say grade inflation, but I actually think it's more accurate than the previous years because it wasn't like teachers just picked a letter and said, oh yeah, this is what this person got. We sat countless class tests under the exam conditions.
Pass rates this year are down on 2020, but up on previous years, while the percentage of pupils achieving A grades reached a record high. In 2019, less than a third of higher candidates were awarded an A grade. There was a huge leap last year, while this year almost half of higher candidates received the top grade. This pattern was repeated in other qualifications.
This is a credible set of results. Young people should feel proud of what they've achieved. So I think young people and the wider system will have confidence in the results that they receive today.
Today's results were always going to be heavily scrutinised. The chaos of last year's algorithm-based results, followed by the scrapping of exams partway through this year. And opposition parties have today raised concerns about the widening attainment gap between the most and least deprived students, which the Scottish Government has vowed to close.
Well, there's been a slight increase in the attainment gap from last year, but when you look at the historical trend, it's still a very, very good picture. So when you compare to 2019 and the years before that, we've seen a very, very big improvement in the attainment gap. But we've determined, of course, to go further.
A record number of Scottish students have been accepted to universities here, their hard work paying off after an exceptional year of challenges in their education. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Paisley.
Let's talk to our education editor, Bramwyn Jeffries, who joins us from Newcastle. And Bramwyn, clearly a very difficult year for students, for teachers, a lot of praise from ministers for how they've all dealt with it.
Well, Sophie, no one wanted a repeat of the terrible heartache for 18-year-olds and the chaos that we saw last year when there was a strong attempt to try and hold standards in place with before the pandemic. Today, ministers across the UK have been very keen to praise the resilience of students who've kept going despite all the disruptions
despite studying online. But nonetheless, within the detail, there are some figures which raise questions. In England, students at private independent schools were twice as likely as those in a state comprehensive to get a top A or A star at A level. Some of the biggest increases were in foreign languages, mainly studied in those schools, and less in some parts of the state sector. There are also questions about differences across regions. As you touched on, here in the northeast, they saw the smallest increase proportionately in those top grades, and schools and colleges are saying that's a reflection of the impact of the pandemic on deprived communities. So where does this get us for next year? Well, potentially a very tricky, slow road back to exams. Ministers and regulators across the UK know next year could be very tricky too, with students who haven't sat traditional exams at 16 then facing potentially key high-stakes exams that will determine the next stages in their life.
Our education editor, Bramwyn Jeffries, thank you. An American woman has filed a civil lawsuit in New York accusing Prince Andrew of sexual abuse. In a statement, Virginia Giuffre claims she was trafficked to the prince by the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein when she was 17. The Duke of York has consistently denied the allegations. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Which of the people in this photograph is telling the truth? The man, Prince Andrew, who categorically denies any impropriety, or the woman, Virginia Giuffre, who alleges she was sexually assaulted by him on 3 occasions? Ms. Giuffre has made these allegations before. She's now followed up with a civil claim filed at a district court in New York. The claim states that when she was 17, she was the victim of sex trafficking. The document states 20 years ago, Prince Andrew's wealth, power, position and connections enabled him to abuse a frightened, vulnerable child with no one there to protect her. It goes on to refer to Prince Andrew's criminal acts and states in conclusion, Prince Andrew's sexual abuse of a child who he knew was a sex trafficking victim and when he was approximately 40 years old goes beyond all possible bounds of decency and is intolerable in a civilised community. Prince Andrew has offered no reaction to the filing of the court claim. His position remains as it was in his interview with Newsnight's Emily Maitlis in November 2019, when he denied any improper behaviour with Miss Giuffre or Virginia Roberts as she was then.
You can say categorically that you don't recall meeting Virginia Roberts, dining with her, dancing with her at Tramp, or going on to have sex with her in a bedroom in a house in Belgravia.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then or any other time?
None whatsoever.
So what are the chances that this civil claim will lead to a trial? It is by no means certain.
There's a lot of steps from filing a lawsuit until you get to trial. The first and major hurdle is that they're going to have to serve Prince Andrew with process. In the United States and New York, you have to personally serve someone with the lawsuit for it to get going. That's going to be difficult considering that he's in the United Kingdom.
Buckingham Palace is doing its best to keep everything to do with Prince Andrew at arm's length. But whatever the truth of these claims, the very fact that a member of the royal family finds himself facing them is clearly damaging. Prince Andrew has withdrawn from public life with the royal family. For all his denials, these latest developments suggest there can be little immediate prospect of him restoring his public reputation. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
More than 75% of UK adults have now been fully vaccinated against coronavirus. The Prime Minister has described the milestone as a huge national achievement. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary has warned that the impact of the pandemic means that more than 13 million people could be waiting for routine operations and hospital treatment in England within the next couple of years. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
The 2 new leaders of the health system in England here at Milton Keynes University Hospital, and the Health Secretary and the head of NHS England are having to face up to a growing waiting list for non-urgent operations.
The patient would know after the surgery whether it's a robot.
They heard about new initiatives including robotic surgery, but Sajid Javid acknowledged the waiting list could more than double.
No one knows what the final number will be. I've said it could go as high as 13 million. But what I want to do is just to make sure that if it does grow, it grows at the lowest possible rate possible, but that we are seeing as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And that will require not just new investment, but also new ways of doing things.
The blue area shows the total number waiting for routine operations in England. From March 2020, during the pandemic, it soared, with 5.3 million now on the list. The orange area shows the number waiting more than 18 weeks, with a sharp increase during the pandemic. Labour said a rescue plan was urgently needed. Behind every number is a patient story, like Hillary's. She's been waiting more than a year and a half for a hip replacement.
Obviously very heavily reliant on painkillers. The pain can be anything from just a constant dull ache through to a stabbing pain. It can disturb my sleep even with painkillers. My frustration, I think, is over not knowing how much longer I'm going to have to wait.
There are many unknowns for the NHS. Although COVID pressures on hospitals are less than feared at one stage, what might happen in the months ahead? And what could happen if there's a severe winter flu season? Those challenges will come on top of the drive to reduce the backlog of routine operations. Another task for the NHS will be the continued rollout of the vaccination programme, now extended to 16 and 17-year-olds.
At the moment, that will be through a combination of GPs contacting people, inviting them in for jabs, and a number of places that are already offering walk-in vaccination opportunities. We'll see many more of those open up this week.
And then there'll be booster jabs for those who've already had 2 doses. The Health Secretary wants these to start in England early next month, but there have been warnings from one expert that would not look good when people in many other parts of the world haven't had a first dose. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The latest government coronavirus figures show there were more than 23,500 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 28,007 new cases per day in the last week. Almost 6,000 people are in hospital with coronavirus. 146 deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours. That is the highest daily death toll since the 12th of March, meaning an average of 89 deaths a day in the last week. 89% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and more than 39.5 million people have had both jabs. That is 75% of adults. The time is just after 6:15, our top story this evening. Record numbers of top grades for A-level students after exams are cancelled for a second year in a row because of the pandemic. And still to come, from a teary goodbye in Barcelona on Sunday to a rowdy hello from fans in Paris, Lionel Messi is on the move.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, England's second test against India is in just 2 days. But with the new 100 gaining more of a share of the spotlight, can all formats of the game get the attention they need?
Yes, I will share actually, and that is that after 31
Scientists are testing an artificial intelligence system that may be able to diagnose dementia after a single brain scan and predict how quickly the condition will advance. Over the next 20 years, it's thought the number of people with dementia in the UK will almost double to 1.6 million. Researchers at the Alan Turing Institute say an early diagnosis could greatly improve patient outcomes. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports.
Now careful over here.
Penelope Clark noticed that her 75-year-old husband Dennis began to forget things last year. They're concerned that he's developing some form of dementia.
Thanks for coming along today.
The couple from Hertfordshire are taking part in trials of a new system that will be able to tell not only whether Dennis has some form of dementia, but how quickly it's likely to develop.
Have you got any questions about it?
No, I think it's fantastic.
If you had a diagnosis that gave you some indication of the progression, would that be of help?
Well, then we could, plan financially as well as a couple to be able to perhaps have a few holidays before things got bad. I couldn't take Dennis on holiday.
It makes me more comfortable because if you get a diagnosis, then you're not waiting months and months and months for someone to come back and say, well, we know what it is now.
Have you heard back from me?
Dennis's brain scan will be analysed by an artificial intelligence computer programme. It compares his scan with those of thousands of dementia patients. In preclinical tests, it's been able to diagnose dementia years before symptoms develop.
If you have a diagnosis of dementia, that's a big thing to take on board. So, you know, when I'm delivering this diagnosis, anything which I can do to be more confident about that, to give people more information, to help them plan their lives, is a great thing to be able to do.
And the new technique can give results much faster. Currently, it can take several scans and many other tests to find out whether someone has dementia. The new artificial intelligence system can potentially pick it up with just one scan, and it can pick it up much earlier in the progression of the disease. The researcher who led the development of the system believes that early and accurate diagnosis of dementia will make treatments much more effective.
The treatments can kick in early and slow down the progression, and at the same time avoid more damage happening to the brain. And it's likely that then symptoms might occur much later in life, or they may actually never occur.
Right, ready, steady, go. The system is currently being tested to see if it works just as well in clinics as it has in the lab. If so, it'll make a big difference to Dennis and millions like him.
Oh, well done, sir.
Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Cambridge.
The inquest into the death of a 20-year-old man who attacked two people with a knife in South London last year has been shown footage of the moment he was shot dead by undercover police officers. Sudesh Aman had been released from prison 10 days earlier after serving time for terrorism offences. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports.
Knife in hand, this was the moment when Sudesh Aman turned on two surveillance officers who immediately shot him dead. He was outside Boots on Streatham High Road in South London and had just stabbed two members of the public. Just over half an hour earlier, he'd left his probation hostel. A convicted terrorist who'd been released from prison just 10 days previously, intelligence suggested he was still an extremist who wanted to carry out an attack. So he was being followed by a 9-man armed surveillance team, on foot, in cars and on a motorbike. A JD sports bag across his stomach concealed a poorly made hoax suicide belt. On Streatham High Road, he went into a hardware shop. A surveillance officer tried to catch up to see what he was doing, but he suddenly emerged with a stolen knife and stabbed a woman and a man as he ran. Both survived. By this time, two surveillance officers were pursuing him with their guns drawn. And outside Boots, a man turned to confront them before being shot.
This ain't real.
A bus passenger filmed the aftermath as more of the surveillance team arrived. It was clear from the CCTV that nobody gave Sudesh Aman any first aid for more than an hour and 20 minutes after he was shot. The jury's been told that this was because of concerns about the possible suicide belt that he was wearing. Firearms officers who arrived within minutes were also taking no chances. The belt was fake, made from iron brew bottles and aluminium foil, but by the time that was clear, Sudesh Aman was dead. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Royal Courts of Justice.
The body of a British woman who went missing in the Pyrenees last year has been found close to where one of her bones was discovered last month. Esther Dingley vanished on a solo trek in November. A charity supporting her family said it suggested that she died by accident. The campaign to free Princess Latifah, the daughter of the ruler of Dubai, has been disbanded after she was pictured with her cousin in Iceland. The campaign was set up after Latifah was forcibly returned to Dubai after making a bid for escape in 2018. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been travelling around the UK listening to voters' concerns and taking stock after recent shifts in the political landscape. Last week, we looked at the impact the Conservatives' success in the Midlands and the north of England is having on their traditional heartlands in the south. Today, we look at Labour's challenge, whether the party can build on success in cities to win back some of the towns it's lost. Alex Forsyth reports from Lee in Greater Manchester.
The members of Lee Scooter Club like things from the past. Their vehicles celebrate old trends. Politically, though, there has been a change of direction. This is one of the places that's seen Labour loyalties overtaken by newfound Tory support.
when Lee was very much a mining town. You had Labour and then you had the unions, and that was big. People had moved away, new people had moved in. I think it's just watered down and down and down.
You're always told that your mum and dad were Labour, so you're a Labour, and you just get it rammed down you. But politics has changed over the years.
Can you see people going back to Labour here?
I can. Yes, I can. Yeah, because I do think Brexit had a lot to do with it.
This former mining town is one of the places that voted leave. Brexit's clearly played a part in political change across the country. Though Trevor, an active Labour member who's now joined the Tories, thinks it's deeper. He says some voters feel Labour's values shifted away from these communities, leaving them open to other parties.
I think they're less tribal than what you think. They're solid in the values, but not tribal in their allegiances. I'm me, and I've been me for an awful long time, and I have a certain set of values, etc. I'm still where I am, and the whole backdrop of the Labour left has shifted further left.
Right across England, the political map has changed. Labour's lost support in several towns in the Midlands and North, like Lee. But half an hour down the road in Manchester, the party's still strong. So how to keep support in cities and rebuild in towns? The mayor here was once the MP for Lee. He says giving communities more power would help voters reconnect, and Labour must be clear about what it can offer.
The country's crying out for somebody to step forward and say, you know what, we can't have this. We need a big drive to improve people's work, improve people's homes, improve people's communities. We've become too timid sometimes and too nuanced in terms of putting forward our policy agenda. I think we kind of have to get bolder again in saying how Labour is the right party to rebuild post-pandemic Britain.
Is Keir Starmer the man to do it?
Well, he's certainly got my support, and I think absolutely he could be the man to do it, no question.
For these current and former Labour backers in Manchester, the challenge is whether a party that's been divided about its direction can appeal across the board.
What is important would be to keep the manifesto we had under the last leader. As a Labour Party, you're veering left and right, trying to position yourself, but you're trying to hold a group together that isn't really meant to be together.
I don't think Labour should aim to leave anyone behind. I don't think Labour's anywhere near with that message about appealing to people and showing how their agenda will make their lives good and a good standard of living, and that's really what they need to do.
Labour's leader is having conversations like this with voters through the summer, trying to work out if and how the party can grow enough support across the country to find a way back to power. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Greater Manchester.
And finally, this was the rapturous welcome for the star footballer Lionel Messi as he arrived in France today to finalise a 2-year deal with Paris Saint-Germain. It's one of the biggest transfers in recent memory. The Argentinian could earn more than £500,000 a week. Messi left his club Barcelona on Sunday after 21 years. He joined as a teenager. Our sports correspondent Katie Gornall reports.
He was dressed a bit like a tourist. But this was no ordinary day tripper. Lionel Messi, one of the game's greatest players, had arrived at a French airport ready to sign for Paris Saint-Germain. Fans, some of whom had been waiting for days, could barely contain themselves.
I watched him play in Barcelona and how he acted, how he's playing with his teammates, how he's finding ways to play the ball is just amazing. And his goals, his free kicks, everything is just amazing. He's the best player.
Today's a historic day. The biggest player on the planet is here in the capital. I'm not going to stay in my neighbourhood. I have to be here.
For Argentina and for his club, Messi has always been a class apart.
Brilliant from Lionel Messi. That's what you expect of him.
At Barcelona, he scored a staggering 672 goals and secured 10 league titles, and there could have been more. In a tearful farewell press conference on Sunday, Messi said he never wanted to leave the club he joined when he was 13, but due to La Liga's salary cap rules, they could no longer afford to keep him.
Barcelona kept spending. You know what happens if at home you spend more than you have? That you cannot afford certain things. So right now, if you look at what happened last season, with 487 million euros in debt just from last season, plus the wages of the players is 110% of what comes in. So technically Barcelona are bankrupt.
And Paris Saint-Germain was perhaps always the most likely destination, a club backed by Qatari money and already littered with stars, including Kylian Mbappe and his former Barca teammate Neymar. Barcelona are now moving on without their biggest star. For Messi, a new story is beginning. Katie Gornall, BBC News.
Time now for a look at the weather with Darren Bett. Is it warming up at last?
Well, it certainly felt more like summer this evening, Sophie, today, with some sunshine around and much drier weather as well. The showers that we have seen in northeast England are fading away. The showers that we have in the northeast of Scotland, these will take longer to fade away later this evening. And the weather tomorrow is going to look a bit different, actually, because heading out in the Atlantic, this is what's heading our way, this band of cloud. It's already arrived in Northern Ireland, and by the morning we're seeing the first signs of rain in Northern Ireland, some wet weather moving in here, heading towards Scotland. A bright start further east, but it will tend to cloud over as this band of rain moves its way steadily eastwards to many parts of the UK. It's moving in further east across Scotland, so it's turning wetter in eastern Scotland in the afternoon tomorrow, and it's going to be cooler than today as well. Eventually we should get some sunshine in western Scotland after the rain. Wet morning in Northern Ireland, sunnier in the afternoon, but we've got the rain heading on to the Pennines into Wales, the far southwest. Midlands towards the southeast of England, dry, increasingly cloudy, but warmer here, could make 25 degrees for the first time this month. Now, that weather front is heading into England and Wales, but the rain peters out overnight. This is the main driver later on tomorrow, with some windy weather heading into the northwest. The weather front, first of all, this is where it is really, here across southern areas, just hanging around, little or no rain on it. The clouds should thin and break. Sunshine further north, but we will see the strengthening winds with the low pressure bringing wetter weather into Northern Ireland and into western parts of Scotland, pegging temperatures back here. But towards the southeast, East Anglia, with some sunshine, again, temperatures could be close to 25 degrees. By the end of the week, it's still pretty windy for many parts of the UK. We've got more showers to come across Scotland and Northern Ireland, even a few showers coming into England and Wales as well. Some sunshine, and temperatures are back down to nearer normal, 18 to 22 Celsius. Sophie.
Darren, thank you. And a reminder now of our main story this evening. Record numbers of top grades for students across the UK after exams are cancelled for a second year in a row because of the pandemic. That's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.